What if one of the oldest tools in the kitchen still had room for innovation? My guest today certainly thinks so. This is Chris Spear, and you're listening to Chefs Without Restaurants, the show where I speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. I have 32 years of working in kitchens, but not restaurants, and currently operate a personal chef service doing dinner parties in the Washington, D.C. area. Today I'm talking with inventor Scott Heimendinger. If you've ever cooked sous vide at home or followed the world of modern culinary technology, there's a good chance you've come across his work. He's the co-founder of Sancerre, one of the companies that help make sous vide available for home cooks. Worked as director of applied research and technical director at Modernist Cuisine, and later helped develop the Innova Precision Oven, bringing combi oven cooking out of the professional kitchens and into people's homes. Now he's taking on another kitchen staple, the chef's knife. After spending 6 years developing what became the world's first ultrasonic chef's knife designed for home cooks, Scott joins me to talk about the technology behind it, what it was like bringing a completely new product category to market, and why he believes innovation isn't about adding technology for technology's sake. It's about helping people feel more confident in the kitchen. Whether you're a chef, a serious home cook, or someone who just enjoys hearing how new ideas come to life, I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Hey, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So for people who don't know, can I get a little bit of your background? You're a food, do you say food technologist? How do you self-identify?
I'm an inventor. That's sort of the primary label that I give to myself. But I focus only on tools meant to help primarily home cooks feel the best they can about themselves in the kitchen. So real quick version of the background is I was originally supposed to make software for a living. I went to college to learn how to do that. And then I worked for IBM and Microsoft. But while I was at Microsoft, in the mid 2000s, just like everybody else, I started a food blog. And that was sort of my moonlighting nights and weekends thing. And it was completely unoriginal and whatever. Until I stumbled across sous vide cooking, which at that point was really only a small handful of the top chefs in the world and some nerds on forums like eGullet talking about this technique and trying to figure out what the times and temperatures were. And this really appealed to the engineering side of my brain. So I wanted to cook sous vide, but then I discovered that everybody was using $1,200 laboratory immersion circulators. I decided to reverse engineer it and build my own. And I did, and that led to sort of an inflection point in my career. I left Microsoft to go work for Modernist Cuisine as the director of applied research and then later as technical director. I also launched Sancerre, which was my first startup that I co-founded. And our whole goal was to make sous vide accessible to home cooks, break that $1,200 price point down to a $200 price point. I did that, had a blast. I got recruited to work with Innova, who were my former sous vide competitors, and I helped them build the world's first home combi oven, the Innova Precision Oven, it was called. And it was the first oven to do wet bulb control at a price point of $600 instead of starting price of $6,000 for like the rationales. Anyway, in 2020, I started work on a new project. I left Modernist Cuisine and I knew I wanted to do something new and something on my own. And that project, I didn't realize it was going to take me 6 years to bring it to life, but that became Seattle Ultrasonics, which is the world's first ultrasonic chef's knife for home cooks.
Now, did you start out with the knife as the project? Like when Seattle Ultrasonics is my new project. Were you totally set on the knife being the thing?
No. When I left Modernist Cuisine, I didn't know actually what I wanted to build. I just knew I wanted to build something. And this is going to sound so cliche, but my wife and I went to a cabin on the river for a weekend, and I sat in the window and just filled a little notepad with ideas and notes and whatever. And then I systematically scratched off the ones that I didn't think would work. I knew, I was going to basically work from home. I wanted to do something that I could make without having to raise money, or certainly not have to raise a lot of money or build a team, and something that I could reasonably prototype with the resources that I had available. So my idea for a new type of refrigerator freezer that made clear spherical ice cubes or whatever. That was straight out because I couldn't prototype that here. But I couldn't scratch the knife off the list. It kept fitting all the criteria. And I wrote down a plan for how I was going to develop the prototype, file the patents, and then go out and shop the idea to license it to companies that are going to make things. And this whole process was going to take me about 6 months. It took me 6 years to launch, and I brought it to market first party.
Well, that's so impressive, though, because it's funny to me. I am not technical. I don't have these skills, and that this was the easy project. I mean, I've seen a lot of your tests along the way. Like, I have to rebuild my fence at my house, and I'm like, I'm not sure I can rebuild this fence, which is just wood and nails, and you're like, oh, well, it's an ultrasonic knife. I can reasonably do that at home with my skills and no investors. That's a huge knowledge gap, I think, between you and most average people, wouldn't you say?
Well, it turned out to be incredible naivety. I ridiculously underestimated how hard the problem actually is. And it's a good thing, too, because if I had known when I started how hard this would actually be, I would have run the other way screaming. I would never have begun. And I think a lot of things take that form. It would never have been made if you knew how painful it was actually going to be. So I was at the beginning of Naivety Mountain and then kept finding new peaks along the way.
Well, I think what's great is as technology in general speeds up, like sometimes you're able to do things now that you couldn't before. And that's why, like, I always keep notebooks of ideas. I myself have something I want to potentially work on. And years ago, I had no idea. But now as you get into 3D printing or using AI to help code something, it seems more within reach. And I don't know that I'll be able to do it, but it seems so much more realistic than 12 years ago when I started putting ideas in a notebook, so it's fun when that stuff catches up.
That's a fantastic point. There's a term called the adjacent possible. And it's basically like, what's the horizon you've just reached of things that you can do now that a little while ago might not have been possible? So ultrasonic cutting tools, like ultrasonic cutters for food, have been around for decades. That the idea of cutting food with ultrasound isn't new, but those machines are enormous. I mean, the power supplies are like bigger than shoe boxes. They cost several $1,000s. A cheap one would be $5,000. You can't really operate them by hand. They're too heavy. So the idea of the adjacent possible was, okay, lithium batteries have gotten small enough and powerful enough that this could be a thing. Microcontrollers for actually, controlling the routines that need to happen inside a device are cheap enough, small enough, easy enough to program. Amplifier circuits, that's a big deal for something like this. These amplifier circuits didn't get cheap. They're still not cheap, but they didn't get miniaturized so that I could make an ultrasonic knife. They got miniaturized for like Bluetooth boomboxes and, all sorts of other cool stuff that I get to take advantage of. The parts became available if you wanted to kind of assemble that sort of thing. Now, unfortunately, 6 years ago, LLMs were not a thing. So all the coding was artisanal. I was writing all this code by hand. And these tools that are like so useful today already were not available to help with the R&D process, to like help me figure out what does the circuitry need to look like, to help me with the calculations of ultrasonic physics and what should the proportions of this be and how do I set up and run a simulation for 1,000 different things that now I can kind of work like a partner with these more sophisticated AI tools and really speed up development. I had to do it all the slow way. So I think if I were starting again from scratch now, that 6 years might compress to 2 or 3.
Well, that's optimistic for people who want to start out a project like this. And I might have to tap you on the shoulder at some point if I decide I'm going to make the leap. And maybe we even talk about, first steps for someone who's got something on the horizon.
I am more than happy to be a bad influence and encourage people to take those steps.
Well, I'm a working chef, so I've been in the kitchen for 30 years. And I think you see things that need improvement. The fact that you go into work every day and you have the same frustration with something, yet there's nothing that exists to fix that, I think you are ripe for the opportunity to, again, it's hard to be an inventor and create things, but when you go to a kitchen every day and you're like, why don't they make a that does this? After doing that for so many days, you're like, okay, maybe I'm the guy who tries to figure out how to do this.
That's cool. I really hope you do. I hope a lot of people do. Being an inventor is not easy, but we sort of, but I want more people to help solve those types of problems. The chances are that if you're facing a problem like that, so are a lot of other people. And the only way to make it better is to do something about it. And yeah, as we talked about a little bit just now, we live in the golden age of rapid prototyping. It has never been faster, easier, or cheaper to bring an idea to life. That's especially true if your idea is just software, but it's also true if it's software and hardware.
Yeah. People who've listened to the show, and especially people who know me, know that I don't know if I'd say I'm the anti-knife guy, but it's one of the things I speak out about the most because I do feel like there's this huge world, especially in the chef world, of like knife porn. And listen, I love craftsmanship, I love artistry, but I see a lot of young cooks feeling like they have to get these custom-made, very expensive knives when I went to Johnson & Wales and graduated in 98. The knives they gave me in 94 that were the F-Dicks, still use them on a daily basis. I bought a block of Henkel's Twin Stars in 97 from a line cook I worked with for $100, and they've held up. And I've bought inexpensive butchering type knives, but I've never spent the money. And I say, like, my Hyundai goes the same place as your Lamborghini. They just look different. And that's how I feel about knives. So I feel like you've actually created something really exciting, very different. It's not just a different way of forging steel or creating a different handle or something. So I just wanted to put that out there because people have probably seen me talk about like the don't buy the expensive custom knife.
I totally get it. Sort of like the best camera is the one you have with you. The same is true of knives. And I think folks should use whatever tools make them happy, full stop. Knives are a really special category because there's value in the function that they provide, where that function you can measure objectively. And I've taken this a little bit to the extreme because I also have a robot arm. But you know, how well do they hold their edge? How sharp can you sharpen that edge? How resistant they are to chipping? You know, all the things that metallurgists are concerned with. But knives also have value for artistry and story and so on. And that's a thing that can affect the prices and perception of knives. And I think that's totally valid. It's not that different from wine. You know, this is made from Pinot Noir and it has this percent alcohol, whatever. And do I enjoy drinking it? Yes or no, or to what extent? This one is also made from Pinot Noir. It's got the exact same ABV, but the bottle is fancier. There's a story around the place that made it. There's whatever mythology or lineage or whatever. And those types of things literally can make you enjoy the experience of drinking that wine more. Like your brain will light up in an fMRI more. And I presume the same is true of knives. If you are, if you've bought some knife because you want to support the craftsperson who made it, you believe in the artistry, you believe in the tradition, that makes you happy. That is awesome. That is also not at all what I am focused on. I'll let the people who are great at that craft focus on that, and I think it's wonderful. And I love knives like that. We were in Japan in last fall. I went to Sakai City. I went to the shop of this maker who's like 5th generation, and he's standing in a hole in the ground, pounding glowing orange metal with the hammer. The rest of the shop looks like it hasn't been touched since 1880. Made beautiful stuff. I got to pick out my blade and my handle and watch them, couple them together. It's a really nice piece. I had a great experience. I love that. Does it cut better than a knife that is a fraction of the price? No. But I love it for that reason. I'm taking a very different approach to knives than those folks are. Um, the way I see it, knives have improved over the last 5 generations of humans quite a bit, but that improvement is invisible to a lot of folks. So, right now, you can walk into any cooking store and buy a knife for $100, $200 that is way better than the best knife you could possibly buy 100 years ago. Um, all knives were non-stainless, right? So like that was an invention. That was a development that drove the quality or capability of knives forward. And since then, there have been 100 much smaller, much more subtle developments in that metallurgists have done to figure out how do I get this balance of sharpness and durability and the ability to resharpen easily and so on. And the performance of knives or the quality of knife you could get per dollar has steadily risen in the last 120 years, something like that. The problem is that is plateauing, that all of the advancements that are happening today in the so-called super steels that knife nerds really, really love, those advancements now come at a really high price. Not just literally the dollars you're paying, but they require exotic equipment to produce the blades, vacuum ovens and special cryo treatment. The metal is so much harder that it wears your tools out in the process of making these knives, or it takes you forever to resharpen to reestablish an edge because it's a really hard metal. So there are these huge trade-offs. So I wonder, is there a way to make the next generation's knives perform better than the prior generation's knives if we're plateaued out on metallurgy? Like, I'm very unsatisfied by the idea that knives just stop getting better, right? That would drive me crazy. And so my thought was, well, if I want to help advance the state of the art, I got to do something different. I have to take a different approach. I'm also not a metallurgist, so I can't really contribute there. I came across these videos on YouTube of commercial ultrasonic food cutters. Have you ever seen these machines?
Only so is that what you're sharing on your Instagram where it's like these giant things cutting down? Because I did look at those. So that's the only time I've seen that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen one, it sort of looks like a big fat guillotine blade. It's got some slots cut in it. It's connected to this big piece of metal. They're big. They're really heavy. Like they can be too heavy to hold by hand. But when you go into Costco and you get the pre-sliced cheesecake or mozzarella log or even shokupan or whatever, chances are those were cut using one of these devices. And the reason that they exist, the reason that they're used is they don't rely on a sharp blade like a knife does. A sharp blade will wear out. All sharp blades wear out. And if you're running a machine 24/7, it's going to wear out pretty fast. And then you spend like so much time in maintenance. These machines don't rely on a sharp blade. They rely on pumping an incredible amount of ultrasonic energy through that kind of guillotine-like cutting head. And it prevents food from sticking to it. So in the Little Debbie factory where they're cutting like sticky snack cakes and and granola bars and all this stuff that will stick to any blade, they don't stick to these because of that ultrasonic energy. So I saw that and it really does look like magic. Like you can smear cream cheese on the side of one of these things and turn it on and it just falls off like rain cascading down a window. It's so
just last
cool.
night I was I needed to cut Chev cheese for a dish and it didn't work. It does what it does. It crumbles and then it like mushes out. And I wanted like a nice disc. And the reality is you're almost never going to get a nice disc of Chev from a log with a traditional knife unless you like maybe freeze it a little bit.
Yeah, or do some other workaround, like you're using dental floss instead of, but like if you're doing production, switching to dental floss is, anyway. I really wanted to take the magic that I saw in those commercial cutter blades and shrink it down and get some of that benefit in a regular chef's knife that was shaped like a chef's knife that you could hold in a pinch grip, that you could like rinse under the sink and just treat like a normal knife. But then with the touch of a button, pick up some of these enhanced kind of magical capabilities. So that's what set me on this whole path is this idea that maybe we can make knives better by adapting this technology that has already been proven in commercial industries and just shrinking it down for the first time into a form factor that home cooks could use.
So where do you even start? Like, what is, for this specific thing, what is the first thing you have to work on?
There's a quote, I think it's a Thomas Edison quote that says, to invent, you need a great imagination and a pile of junk. So the first thing I did was I got a pile of junk. I bought a bunch of, ultrasonic cleaning transducers and parts and things that I could take apart and try to figure out, how do you make ultrasonics go? It's very different than driving a motor, like wildly different. It's very different than driving a speaker, even though all of these things have something in common. And so I had a lot of learning to do, slapping together parts and just trying to get some output out of it. So that was the first thing I did was I just naively bought a bunch of stuff and connected it up and said, can I make anything go?
Had you ever played with the ultrasonic homogenizer? I think that's my only experience with ultrasonics is Dave Arnold was doing something with it. And then I don't know if he pulled it out of whatever and it made this squealing sound that is still in my brain from 10 years ago that, gave me an instant migraine.
Yes, I have played with that one and used it to like make mayonnaise and do all sorts of fun experiments. That is similar in principle. It's got the kind of the same engine in it. It's driven by piezo electric ceramic discs that get this high power signal and convert that into motion. And similarly, ultrasonic cutters, ultrasonic homogenizers, ultrasonic welders, ultrasonic cleaning baths, all this kind of stuff is based on this principle of vibration that happens really small in amplitude, right? Like you can't see the movement back and forth with the naked eye. It's too small, but it happens at extremely high frequency. So it's happening over and over again, really, really fast and with a lot of power or a lot of energy going into the thing. So on these ultrasonic knives, including my knife, it's not like a reciprocating saw where you're moving the whole saw blade back and forth or like jigsaw,
granddad's turkey cutting knife.
Exactly. Yeah. It is not moving like granddad's turkey cutter where you're driving this whole blade back and forth like a Theragun. You're actually sending a shock wave of energy into the metal, and that wave is so powerful that it causes the metal itself to expand and contract. You're causing steel to expand and contract just by a tiny amount, not enough that it creates stress issues or cracks or fractures in the steel. They're meant to do this, but sort of like when you tap a tuning fork, and the metal is vibrating, that kind of idea, but where you're controlling those vibrations.
I thought it's interesting. I've seen a lot of videos on this and you can't tell. I mean, maybe if you had it in front of you, but I don't think you can, right? But it's off and then it's on and it just looks the same.
Yep. It looks the same to the naked eye. When you're holding my knife by the handle, there's no vibration in the handle. It's not like your electric toothbrush. You can feel it if you rub your fingers along the edge of the blade while it's on, not the cutting edge, but just to the sides on the belly. You can feel, it feels like turning an air hockey table on and off. That reduced friction you get by touching the surface that's in motion. It's a really bizarre feeling that we don't have kind of an everyday frame of reference.
Does the whole blade have that, or does it somehow move it down just towards the bottom part? Or like if you touch the top, can you feel it vibrating up there?
Great question. The top doesn't vibrate as much. And the reason is that, if you look from spine to edge, the blade is shaped like a wedge. The amplitude of the energy goes with the cross-sectional area. So in other words, as the material gets narrower, the amplitude of the energy goes up. Kind of like the same reason that a bullwhip comes to a taper, to make the end go really fast. same sort of idea. So the energy really does get concentrated down towards the cutting edge. And then you feel it with your fingers. It's sort of on and off in spots along the blade. And that's because you have a standing wave that's happening. And in every standing wave, there are nodes where everything is still, and then antinodes where everything is moving.
I love seeing innovation like this in kitchens, but specifically for home cooks. I take for granted, I think, my cooking skill. I'm a personal chef. I'm in people's homes multiple times a week. And people are scared to cook. They're unsure of themselves in the kitchen. And I just think like having a few tools and a few recipes that can kind of give them that confidence. I mean, knife skills. I just think of my mom and taking like 20 minutes to cut one onion. It's like, if you could just like speed up that process, I think you'd feel a lot more comfortable cooking.
You totally nailed it. Really, everything that I've worked on professionally has been a way of trying to make people feel confident in their own home kitchens. A sous vide machine, from my perspective, yeah, it's a machine that keeps water at the right temperature, but really, it's a machine that turns anxiety into confidence, right? You bought that prime rib roast, which was a giant chunk of change, and now you're about to cut into it for the first time in front of your whole family at, New Year's Eve dinner or whatever. That's a really anxious moment to know, is it undercooked? Is it overcooked? Right? You don't know what's going to happen. Sous vide made that so predictable that you could kind of like, no hand shoot the ball because you always knew that it was going to come out totally perfect. I am a home cook. I am not a professional chef. Even though I worked at Modernist Cuisine, I didn't work in the kitchen. I'm a fine home cook. I've got a bunch of friends who've got better knife skills than I do, who are better home cooks than I am. But I see the opportunity I have is to create the tools that help cooks feel better about themselves, feel more confident. I believe that in some tiny little way, the whole world gets better the more people enjoy cooking
and
at home.
going back to me cooking for people, on the opposite end, I do have people who are, in some respects, I feel like more advanced than me, especially on niche things, right? Like you're seeing like pizza is a great example. Now that we have baking seals and unis and all that, I go to people's houses and I'm not doing pizza, but then they'll like want to talk about that, or smoking and like, ratcheting in their whole thing. So that's exciting. And it's once they get this one tool, they got their big green egg or they got their new, whatever, and then they just nerd out on that. So there's definitely this rise. And sometimes I'm like, that's outside my wheelhouse. Like I do okay on pizza, but it sounds like you got pizza on lock. Like I can't give you any tips.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I think it's so cool to go down rabbit holes. I'm guilty of some of these. Pizza and smoking are two of the ones that I'm definitely practice and refine and dial in. And then it feels great to have guests over and be able to do pizzas with confidence or serve a smoked chicken with confidence.
I want to talk about the handle because that's what I hear the most from when I talk to people about knives, especially when I say like, I would never spend that on the knife. And what people say is, but it's the handle, or I'll say like, I use this knife and they'll say, well, I don't like that because I don't like the handle. So clearly you're making a knife that has to have a universal handle. How do you decide, especially for home cook, like what the handle's going to look like? Plus also, you have a lot of other things going on with the handle than just, what it's crafted from on the outside.
Yeah. For everybody else making knives, the handle is an aesthetic decision, right? It can look like whatever you want. It can be whatever size you prefer. It could be as thin as a chopstick. It could be as wide as a baseball bat. That's up to you. For me, I actually have to put stuff in the handle, and I have to put a lot of stuff in the handle. So I'm showing you this on video now. This is my handle. It is large as knife handles go. There's no way around that. It is not as big as some people think. So I've got medium-sized hands here, and you can see that everything kind of fits comfortably. But the next size up in electronics and systems that run ultrasonics are the size of a shoebox. So inside my handle, I have a circuit board that is folded on itself twice, to have 6 layers, to use up all the 3D space, to try to get the handle even this small. The battery pack here has to, not only be insertable and hold the largest battery that we can get away with, but it also has to be waterproofed and connected in here. And so the design of the handle that is on my knife was driven basically by the inside out. How small could we possibly shrink the guts of this thing, which has tremendously complex circuit boards, and then wrap the handle around and still make this kind of useful? Now, amazingly, the balance point on my knife is right here at the bolster, exactly where you'd expect it to be on any knife. And the design of the button, and this went through, dozens and dozens of rounds of prototyping and ideation or whatever, is such that if you want to use the sort of hammer grip on your knife, you can reach it with a finger. If you want to use a pinch grip, there's always a finger that you can just touch right on that button, and you're good to go. And it's nicely balanced. It's on the heavier side, not as heavy as a meat cleaver, but a little heavier than my heaviest chef's knife, which is the Kramer by Zwilling, which is a larger, heavier knife. And so I'm sympathetic anytime somebody's like, yeah, the handle's big, or yeah, it's a little heavy. Except that, like, come on, man. Like, this is stepped down from 20 pounds and a shoebox. So please, like, grant a little grace to how much we have gone here. But I also recognize that, like, handles are a very personal thing. Like, what feels right to you? Just like, what kind of shoe feels good on your foot or whatever. That can be a really highly personal sort of thing. I hope in the future to be able to shrink my handle even more, to be able to lighten up on how much it weighs and whatever. I am a little bit at the mercy of just what is the boundary of what's physically possible. So a lot of work went into this, making sure it's strong enough.
One of the things that I always think about is I see something like this, and then I want to get it, especially on the early end, but then I feel like then successively the next gens come, and then it's like I spent a decent amount of money for something that's now not the best, and always figuring out the point. It's the same with the phone. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to get the best phone, and then literally after I buy it, like 4 weeks later, the new one comes out, and I already have is it FOMO or what happened, whatever it is. And I've seen it with circulators and all those things. So how do you think about that as both the person designing, but also the customer, like that they're going to feel happy with what they buy, knowing that you're probably going to have another gen that has better battery life or a stronger blade or something coming down the pike?
Yeah, this is a sort of a natural part of how technology does or evolves. Everything that you just said is true. And I do hope in the future to have to make everything better, stronger, faster, lighter, cheaper. That's definitely the goal. It was really important to me, though, that I'm shipping a product that I think will last people a long time. It's not something that I like. Everything I make, like, I want you to use it forever. It makes me so happy when people come up to me and they're like, I still got a Sancerre that's like still kicking after all these years. That is so cool. I'm really not interested in trying to earn repeat business by making a thing that then like stops being good in a short while. Like, screw that. I would rather make more things. I would rather make the Nakiri and the Santoku and the bread knife and the slicer and earn your repeat business by you wanting to buy more SKUs than wanting to buy the same product over and over again. The other thing, though, is in the way that I have shaped my business. A venture capital backed company would go like, okay, cool, we've got a tech knife product. Now we need to charge people a subscription for it. And then, we need to like make it obsolete 2 years from now and whatever, because that's the only way that they get to these like enormous revenue numbers. I built the company a different way. I did take a small round of investment from angel investors, a sort of a seed round, because I needed money to get to production. But my business doesn't require scaling like a venture capital thing in order for me to keep working on this. What is required, though, are early adopters who want to help support the idea and who want to use the product. A lot of these folks recognize that, in a couple of years, yeah, maybe there will be a next gen. But buying the first gen is the fuel that I need as an inventor to be able to make the second gen. I recognize that dynamic. It makes me incredibly loyal to my earliest customers. I really want to move heaven and earth to make those customers happy. If something has gone wrong, whatever, it is personally meaningful. Every single order that comes in, I see with my own eyes. I've got a Vesta board in the other room, and it flips over and goes, John Smith ordered a knife for this whatever. Every single one is meaningful, means a lot to me, and I want to take care of these folks in return because they're the people who are allowing the next generation of progress to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really cool because it is, like you said before, quite often some of these companies, they're on like 3 gens in a year and a half or something like that. And I'm always like, oh, what am I missing out? I would have loved to have that extra thing that it does, and it's only $50 more than what I already paid. I don't want to downplay, but like, I don't know how many advancements you would have. Like if again, I've had knives like 30 years, right? So if it's got a sharp blade and it cuts and does the job, I think it would probably be battery life. Like, I think that's the thing with all of these tech things now, right? It's like I loved my electric lawnmower for the first year, and now the battery, I can get half the lawn done. And by the way, a new battery is $400, which is essentially the cost of the whole lawnmower in the first place. And you're like, that was great, but I just don't get the battery life that I used to.
Totally. Completely get it. And this is, unfortunately, just a challenge with lithium battery cells is that they degrade over time. I tried to pick cells that have the best lifetime curves and whatever. And we sell replacement battery packs. I really don't want to sell you a replacement battery. Like, that is not the intention. I want you to have one battery and I want it to last a really, really long time. But it's funny you bring that up about, what advancements really could happen. This is the only home chef's knife that has firmware on it, right? There's code that runs on the knife. And we've been able to find improvements after we shipped about ways to bring the knife into tune faster, better, more stably, and even ways to decrease the power consumption when the knife is off so your battery lasts longer. We've already shipped some of those updates. We're getting ready, as we're recording right now, we're getting ready to ship another one in about a week that's going to help standby time quite a bit. And you can take your knife and any phone or computer, you don't have to install an app. You go to the website and it transfers the new firmware wirelessly, and now your knife has gotten better for free. So that's a cool thing to do. I wish that I had just gotten all the code completely 100% optimized when we shipped. But it's kind of neat to be able to make your product get better. Oh,
absolutely. I have an Aura ring, and it's the same thing. I've had it for like 4 years now, and then all of a sudden now it's like it can sense this thing, or it has better like tracking on how far you walk, and I haven't had to buy a new one. You just get a thing on the app, and the firmware updates, and now it tracks your breathing or whatever, or you get better step recognition or something.
Totally. One more example is on the circuit board inside the knife, there is an accelerometer and gyroscope chip, right? So the same thing that your phone has, the sort of motion sensor to know if you're portrait or landscape or whatever. And I'm not doing much with that chip right now, but in the future, if I can get around to it, I can help you determine if you're holding the knife at the right angle to your sharpening stone, so that you don't have to guess, or that you get kind of visual feedback in real time about the angle that you're resharpening to, for instance. And that's a thing that can just kind of get cool and better over time. And it's kind of neat. Now, that is all beside the point. All the connected stuff, like I hate when I have to pull out my phone to use something in the kitchen. I'm disgusted by all of that. And so the scenarios I'm talking about are like the one-offs, right? Like, every couple months, maybe I update to get the latest and greatest firmware, or I'm doing a maintenance task, and it can be a little better if I have a screen involved. But it was important to me that in order to use this knife, all you do is push a button. That's it. There's nothing that has to be connected. You don't have to register. There's no subscription. It doesn't pair to Wi-Fi. You just push the
I love
freaking
that.
button.
So I want to talk about the sharpening because you've clearly made this for home cooks. I think that's even for some professional chefs, one of the scariest things. Like, do I use a stone? Is it a tri-stone? A lot of people have the electric thing that grinds off the edge. If you're expecting home cooks to be using this, talk about what the sharpening process looks like.
So most home cooks' knives are dull, right? Like you know this. You go into other people's homes and kitchens, and I'm sure you bring your own cutlery with
I
you.
bring my own. Yep.
Of course. And for anybody listening, going like, "Oh well, my knives at home are sharp." Cool, you're the outlier. Think about the knives at the last Airbnb you stayed at, right? That represents the average of the world. So I designed my knife for people whose knives were probably last sharp on their wedding registry. Um, uh, and for folks who may never resharpen this knife. Now, it's made of knife steel. It's made of Japanese AUS 10, which is a very nice knife steel, but it doesn't somehow break the laws of physics. It's not like it doesn't benefit from resharpening. You can and should resharpen it just like any other knife. But even if you don't, even if you're a home cook who never resharpens this knife, there is still a benefit to the ultrasonics. When you push the button and turn it on, the blade behaves sharper than it physically is at any level of physical sharpness. So when it comes straight from the factory, it's quite sharp. And it goes from quite sharp to like insanely sharp in the right points on the blade. But if you let it get dull, it goes from dull to less dull when you turn it on. But the second part, going back to like the goat cheese example you brought up, if you're cutting cheese, for instance, the cheese doesn't care how sharp your knife is, right? That's not the problem. The problem is stickiness on the sides of the blade, that food release. And regardless of edge sharpness, the ultrasonics still improve the food release on the sides of the blade always. And it turns out that friction on the sides of the blade is a lot of the force required to cut through foods, not just a block of cheese, but even when you're completing the cut in a potato or a carrot or something, it's not so much the cutting edge doing the work, it's the rest of the geometry of the blade and that friction. So there is some sustained benefit, even if the knife gets dull. Now, it's not going to go from dull to like mega ultra, hair whittling sharp just because you turned on the ultrasonics. It's a boost. It's not magic. So it's designed sort of with all of that in mind. And, I really want to make sure that I'm not overstating how much the ultrasonics boost. It is a boost, but it's like an e-bike. It's not like a lightsaber, right? You're not going to all of a sudden cut through your wood cutting board or be able to use exactly zero force to finish off these foods. But there is a benefit. It's kind of like having the wind at your back, and you kind of get used to that, and it's nice.
And what do you think is the best way for, especially a home cook, to sharpen them? Like, do you have a favorite method or product to sharpen? It's not, you have to be this insane knife person now and have like all kinds of gear and stones and oils and stuff.
Totally. I think that almost anything is better than nothing at all, right? Like almost anything you do to maintain your knives is great. Even if you only have a honing rod, which is not sharpening, it's just sort of straightening out the last little bit of metal at the edge, which I'm sure all your listeners know already, but most
Hopefully.
home cooks don't. The one thing I would say is maybe not better than nothing are the pull through sharpeners where you've got this kind of V wedge and you're just dragging the blade through it. Those can do a lot of damage. They can make your knife feel sharper for like 10 seconds because they put this big burr on the edge of the blade, but that burr wears off and you're just eating material, right? It's a really blunt instrument
We had
for.
a knife sharpening company, and I'm sure that's what they did. And you would start with like a chef's knife, and at some point it starts to look like a boning knife. Like you knew it was legitimately like a chef's knife, and then it comes in, it's like, this is no longer a chef's knife. Like this is like a fillet knife, boning knife type situation.
Yup. I have seen those knives in sort of the parents' collections that have just been progressively more and more eaten away. I think if you're a home cook and you wanna start dipping your toe in, start with a whetstone that's just got a coarse grit on one side and a fine grit on the other. Go to YouTube and search for, like, Bob Kramer knife sharpening, and he's got a short video that shows you kind of all the essentials. It's really popular, and he explains it very well. Um, and for, 25 to $40, now you've got a way to maintain your knives.
So what is I mean, you just launched this, but what's next? Like where are you at with both this, and is there anything else you're looking at, or are you just going to be refining the knife for a while?
All of the above. I am working on refinements to the knife. We publicly launched in September and opened for pre-orders, and that was great. We sold out in about 60 days of our first production run. Those first customers have their knives now, which is really exciting. So we've been getting feedback from folks and whatever. There's 100 little improvements that we're making, things we found from the field where we can make small changes to make the product better, working on updating firmware to eke the best performance possible out of all the knives, and supply chain things and tariff things. And, running a hardware business is really complicated. So doing all of that stuff. The plan was never just knives, although it will probably be just knives for a while. But I have prototypes of ultrasonic ice cream scoop and other tools. I think about the sort of sonification of the kitchen, and is it possible to make a ultrasonic microplane that actually releases garlic shavings instead of them being stuck to the underside? So those things are on the horizon, but knives is going to be it for a little while. A lot of my time is also spent just trying to educate the world on this. It's a really new thing. In the world of knives, you'll find that people have really baked in preferences and beliefs, right? Thou shalt always do this and you shalt not do that, whatever. And sometimes those beliefs are based in objective science. Sometimes that's because what somebody taught you and it stuck or whatever. And rightfully so, a bunch of people's first reaction to the idea of an ultrasonic knife is, oh, that sounds like a gimmick, or, you're just trying to whatever, separate me from my money or pass something off. And so it's my responsibility to show and prove, right? To say, this is where the technology came from. Here's what it's good for. It's not good for everything. It's not a miracle, thing that's going to make, you can't make a dull knife behave amazing just because you put ultrasonics on it. But here are the benefits, and here's why this might be the way forward for progress in knives. That's a big education lift. And so I'm trying to figure out the right way to help people understand the benefits and not turn them off because it's new and the world of knives is very steeped in old tradition.
And I don't know if you've thought about kids at all. Like I think so. I have twins. They're going to be 14 this summer. We've always had them cook at home. You start off with these like blades that have literally no sharpness, right? These little things. But then, I'm watching them and I'm trying to teach them how to properly cut, but the force with which they have to really push through, and like I know when to like push and when to like not give it as much, and just watching them cut into some of those, like as you get into root vegetables and things, it's like I really think it would be great to have something that they can get in and use. And I think you'd see kids starting at a much younger age, because that's really where I'm having trouble with them in the kitchen. And both of my kids have started working with me. They come out on jobs and there's only certain things I can give them to do. And my daughter now has started her own cottage bakery, so there is some cutting involved. So I'm trying to get them comfortable with knives, but I definitely am always around when they're using them because it's just a huge hazard. I mean, I don't need them cutting a finger off.
Totally. Yeah. I support one knife per child policy. Every kid needs a knife. I also support a end with the same number of fingers you started with policy.
Yeah, that's a good way to go. Yes. But it would be a really cool story, if they were like 40 years old and missing a pinky. Well, thanks again. And as always, this is Chris with Chefs Without Restaurants. Thanks so much for listening and have a great week.